This is really good. He's really funny. I was just feeling worse and worse. I was just wanting him to dip. I wanted a low. I wanted a flat ending, and he gave it the punch at the end as well. So I hope you take away some useful things. I think Cure was inspiring and getting you think about the right things. So I think there's a way to harness Twitter and a way to practice through Twitter, and not doing that kind of, just taking all those shiny things. You can practice anything. If we just move on a slide. On that front, seamless link, between seeing all those good things on Twitter and kind of, CPD, you get these two great ideas, you try them next day, you try them for the next 2 weeks. Do you ever, try them a year after? That's kind of an acid test of whether, something's really worked. Dylan William also, in a different speech, I wasn't there this time, made this comment about not effectively trying to do too many different new strategies. I was speaking to a teacher earlier on, and they were saying, Ofsted has been in there, looming in the picture. It's in my picture, it's due at my school. But as a school, they were trying to do all these new progress things, because Ofsted won 20-minute progress. And by trying so many good things, and they were good things, actually, it just confused things. A lot of practitioners, a lot of teachers couldn't really get to grips with them because it was just too much, I think. And then it leads towards my practical kind of way I focused on practice, about deliberate practice. And it's about finding those strategies. And you need to find them in your school, because I don't have the answer to give you for the context of your school. Your students in your classes will be very different to the students in mine. We might have common overlaps, I think. Howell mentioned about questioning earlier, and that's something I'll talk about. There are some core practices. But I think it's about stopping doing all these different brilliant things and then actually working within your department, and then looking in the mirror and knowing your own teacher style, knowing your own comfort level, knowing you mightn't be a Hal Roberts in the classroom, you mightn't be able to get those kids really laughing with all of that the way he did, but you need to focus in on this idea of the 80-20 rule. Now the 80-20 rules, it's got different versions. My version, okay, is that you find that 20% of strategies that has 80% of the impact, okay, and you narrow it down. And you practice those literally 2 or 3 things that have the bigger impact. And I've got a couple of new NQTs coming into the department, and that's something I've always been interested in, giving advice to new teachers. I'm currently writing a lot about that. And it's often saying, don't spend all that time creating a resource that's used once. Find the strategies in the 20% that you use over and over, and that have that high impact. Questioning is one of them. It's kind of ruined my next little game thing. But questioning is one of those tasks. You don't need any glamorous, strategies or any, glamorous resources to be brilliant at questioning. But if you get better at questioning, it has a massive impact on all your classes. So it's about honing in on the things that mightn't take masses of resources, etc., or external training. You don't need an iPad for it, you don't need anything like that. But that core practice can make you better. I'm going to talk about this. I've mentioned already about the doing that 1 year of teaching 20 times, and that's repeated practice. And we all do repeated practice. Yesterday, when I had this to go to, and I had to sort my cover and kind of all those practical things and try and clear my weekend a little bit, I didn't teach brilliant lessons. That is the reality. I'm sorry to disappoint. And that was just a bit of repeated practice. I could wing it based on I've done that 100 times before. I can teach good lessons pretty solidly, and some not so good. That's the reality as well. But I can kind of get through it. And repeated practice, we've all got that sense of repeated practice where we can all turn on solid lessons pretty comfortably. Deliberate practice is a bit different. Okay, and I've chosen that Bruce Lee quote about practicing in, narrowing down, and over with annoying repetition. Because who likes dull failures and repetition and focusing in on one thing? We don't really like it. It's not that enjoyable. But deliberate practice actually makes much more of a difference than just repeated practice. Okay, so next slide. What deliberate practice is, if I was to recommend a book, I'd recommend a book called Practice Perfect by Doug Lemov. And he's a guy in America who's behind a chain of charter schools. He's also written a book called Teach Like a Champion, which is a brilliant American title. And I showed that to some people in my department and they just laughed at me. They're not going to read Teach Like a Champion. But actually, it's a very good book. But Doug Lemov in Practice Perfect starts to give a lot of examples from sport and training drills. So if you take a golfer, a very good example of golfing is that you can go to a driving range and just smack that ball 100 times. Okay? Quite obviously, that repeated practice won't make you improve. Okay? Deliberate practice, and if I use it again, the kind of golfing, is to identify a skill. So you might be identifying, a certain type of shot. So it might be, a pitch. Okay, so that's kind of a short little chip shot. And then the time and place is better for a class. I'll show you an example of mine. But you practice that one shot over and over. But you refine the focus. Ideally with a critical friend. A top golfer would use a coach. And coaching, I think, has a huge part to play in our schools. I think it's the future of CPD. Kind of be dangerous about the future of education. But getting that kind of focus about, well, you're practicing a pitch shot, but how far are you looking to hit it? Giving that little detail about exactly how you're going to practice. And I think we would do deliberate practice with an NQT, but maybe we stop doing it ourselves after 3 years. Okay, maybe we just kind of do a lot of repeated stuff and think we can do it. I think what's important is this critical friend. Now, some people don't have critical friends. That sounds a bit sad, doesn't it? We don't have friends. I didn't really have the confidence in the last year to have someone in my department where I could say, can you watch me a little bit regularly, or can I kind of talk things through? Whereas I do that for an NQT quite regularly. Okay? Part of the job, an hour every week to do that. But we kind of stopped doing it ourselves. And my way out of that loop was the blog. And that got me reflecting, and I didn't have someone else giving me lots of guidance, but I had a lot of feedback from the blog, okay, about things they'd done. And then I started to have this dialogue, and the dialogue on Twitter. So I started to find this kind of proxy critical friend. But to really do it well, I think you find a coach, you find a colleague that you're committed to improving. As a subject leader, I have orchestrated a coaching program where people have worked in this situation and focusing in and using video cameras and that type of thing. Recording and reflecting systematically. I think one thing about practice is that, again, with repeated practice, we've all got really busy, busy lives, and certain days we are not going to be able to practice fully. We're not going to even often be able to think about our practice. We're too busy focusing on other things and other people. Say if you're in a department and you're thinking about colleagues, or you've got a leadership role, or you've got a trip, and all these other kinds of things that busy our day. But we need to find that time to record and reflect more systematically. And again, this feels a lot like what we used to do on PGCE, what we used to do in that first year as an NQT. You're made to do it. But we stopped doing it. And do we not have the time to do it? I think that's a false economy. Okay? I think you can spend years kind of plateauing, finding difficulties and not being that happy because you're kind of capped, your quality's a bit capped. And all of those kind of negatives you can feel because you've not spent that time to systematically reflect on, well, why haven't you just made those little improvements that make the big difference? It's finding other members of staff. Student voice is a good one, kind of, especially in the kind of the world of teacher pay changing. The idea of student voice and can be rankle at some people. Okay, but has anyone done one of those 360-degree appraisals before? Okay, they're quite daunting, but it's interesting because they open up issues with your practice that you never even thought of, and it's about getting that honest appraisal. And if I think about teachers I've worked with, those teachers who don't really improve is they're a bit frightened of ever being told they're not good enough. and they never really ask student voice. Or student voice is brilliant in that question. How great was my teaching this year? it was brilliant. Or a scale. You know, am I good, very good, or averagely good? You can manipulate student voice like anything, but getting that honest appraisal. And you should be able to get that from colleagues as well. I think the coaching system and model can work brilliantly to do that. Regular feedback. Okay. How many people have just this year had that one lesson observation, that one observer focus on their practice? Mm-hmm. Anyone have a lot of feedback this year? Is it learning walk SLT feedback? Is it developmental feedback?
All of it. It's learning walk, booklets, children interviews, just normal observations, and there's something every single week.
Wow. That's a lot of feedback. How do you feel about it? Do you feel like it develops your practice?
Yes.
Occasionally, but it's also, it can be a bit top-heavy. Sometimes, occasionally, there's only so many times you can get perhaps not the most positive comments, and then you just start feeling, you know, I can do no right, kind of thing, and it can have that, and sort of, it can tip over a little bit too much, and then you start that sort of vicious cycle, sort of down.
You can't always feel good, like, for the whole month, put it that way, because you kind of, because something's...
Yeah, you check all the time, something's going to be...
Yeah, so you might not mark your last few pieces of work or something like that, because you tried to invest time in other things, so it's hard going, but we know why we've got to do it.
Yeah, I think
primary.
I think one thing at my school, for people on Twitter, John Tomsit's my school head, kind of popular, so he's written a few things about it, but as a subject leader, I don't do lesson observations anymore. Because there's this concept of poacher and game predator. I'm really good friends with people in my department, and I do lead them in lots of ways, and if there's an issue, I will challenge them on it, but I don't do those observations, because instead I do learning walks that are developmental. I don't write names down and that type of thing. You have to have that feedback. That is the right type of feedback. And a lot of this, again, this idea of seizing your own CPD is about doing it almost separate of kind of the top-down, learning walks. And some learning walks in schools are great and can help. Others are a proxy for Ofsted and they're rubbish. That's the reality of it.
When you do a learning walk, is it looking at their displays and things like that, or you looking at the books and things as well?
We typically identify focus, but then, and which will link into what our training is that month, because we kind of do rolling training. But I'll pick up other things as well, and it'll be a bit organic.
So who watches your team teach then? If you
SLT, yeah. And it's good actually.
Sorry, our school turned it on its head a little bit, but they were doing the typical Ofsted cone, let's do lots of things. But one thing that I thought was quite good is that they put us in learning huddles. And something that I wanted to work on was literacy and how can I'm an ICT teacher, and I was getting some of the things they were writing on their blogs just weren't very comprehensible. So I thought, right, I really want to build literacy in. So in my learning huddle, I had a literacy teacher, and she wanted to know how she could track progress better, so she came to see me. And I found that a lot more beneficial. And we also have to do things like inquiry questions. So everyone in the school has an inquiry question. So mine is, how can I demonstrate outstanding progress in my lessons? And then you have to go out and you have to find people. And I found that much better.
It's about, I think the element of choice is important. It's like the emotional value of choosing something makes you invest in doing it. My school hasn't got the perfect model, but we have a fortnightly rolling programme of training. So every Monday we finish an hour early and we have 2 hours of training. And a fortnight that's in a department is called a subject outstanding learning community. And then the other fortnight, it's the whole school. And next year we're moving to coaching triads, where you can identify that one area of your practice, maybe two, but that you can work on improving with those other people in the triad. And it involves using iris, the videoing, etc. But I think there needs to be a movement towards that choosing what you need. But then also we've got responsibility to do the work ourselves and to do some research, to read some books about education, and at what point do we stop reading about being a good teacher when we'll happily say to our best students in Year 11 or Year 6, read more widely, and then we're hypocrites about it ourselves. So I think that element of choice is what this is all about. It's about you choosing what your area of focus is. Next slide.